I'm the Vice President of Sales at Next Dimension and your host today. I want to thank each and every one of you for your time to be with us. In today's webinar, we'll explore how AI-powered cyber threats are rapidly evolving and what this means for organizations like yours. We'll walk through with Andrew real-world style attack scenarios from phishing and credential theft to ransomware. And we'll illustrate how organizations use AI to scale, automate, and accelerate breaches. And then finally, we'll discuss how businesses can turn cybersecurity into a driver of trust, resilience, and growth. And so today we have Andrew Scott, who is a cybersecurity leader with over a decade of experience specializing in enterprise security architecture and SOC operations. He has designed and implemented complex security solutions for federal and Fortune 500 clients at Leidos, CrowdStrike, and IBM. Currently field CISO at Total, he helps guide Next Dimension and our clients in building robust and resilient security programs. Andrew is a certified information system security professional and a certified risk and information systems controls thought leader who regularly contributes to industry publications and speaks at cybersecurity events. So Andrew, without further ado, welcome and thank you, and I'll turn the screen over to yourself.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, and great to be here with you all in the Next Dimension team and everyone on the line. Happy to be speaking with you all. I really like these types of events and engagements and opportunities, right? Just because I think it's incredibly important as we start to explore what you mentioned, Mark, about the changing threat landscape, but also just the changing nature of just technology and how businesses are using it, and both the blessing and a little bit of a curse that it creates for organizations. So more than happy to talk about all this and share this with you today. And there is a Q&A at the end, and I'd really encourage everyone as we work through this today, really think about your own organization, how you're using technology, AI, where you're looking next year, right? We're at a kind of perfect time for kind of reflection of this year, but where do we want to go next year and the year afterwards? And hopefully we can have some good Q&A and so forth at the end. But as we kind of work through this, we'll jump forward a little faster. We're going to be talking, as Marcus, you mentioned, really about what is cyber risk, but how do we translate that into a business advantage and using some of those real world use cases. So as we explore this today, I'd really, kind of, in addition to think about your business, I want folks to really keep in the back of their mind, what is your business in a way worth to you? And of that as well, what would inhibit your business from a technology or cyber attack perspective? What would inhibit you from achieving the goals you want? How much pain is too much, whether that's downtime, financial implications, lost customers, loss of reputational damage, even getting into, God forbid, extortion or attack. Really, what would prevent you all from achieving your goals, and how does technology play a role in that? And maybe your posture is different, it's different for everyone. But I just always like, let's keep that in the back of our minds as we work through this. So, as an example, right, you all through that, that region of, Toronto and South, Central and Western, Eastern Canada, but, kind of that a golden horseshoe attack. What does that look like for an organization, let's say? And this will be a scenario, right? We're not actually highlighting that exact organization, but let's look at what an attack would look like based upon these shifts. And then what is a holistic security strategy? And especially that vulnerability that mid-market orgs are carrying, right? I mentioned your use of technology. What does that technology dependency bring, both in terms of opportunity, but also risk? We're going to look at a couple real world examples that we can kind of baseline our evaluation from. And then, okay, what does it look like going forward? It's not all gloom and doom, but how can we sort of develop a strategy and a plan forward? So cybersecurity isn't just the IT guy's problem anymore. It's sort of everyone's, and we see this just because the nature of adoption, cloud, phishing, all these different attacks. So if we look at an example timeline here, all right? So early Monday morning, we see phishing campaign, kind of someone clicks an email, and it redirects them to, a place where they're going to enter their credentials in. Oh, please reset your username and password. We've all seen these, and they're getting better and better with AI. right? It's really getting increasingly difficult to figure out what is and is not malicious, right? So AI is really helping with a lot of that. So that employee goes ahead and enters their credentials in thinking that they were just resetting it. Cool. Later that afternoon, things start to look a little funny. Systems start acting a little wonky. That malicious actors starting to kind of move around the network, and because they've now stolen those users' credentials and logged in, they're now starting to kind of explore the environment. Monday afternoon, Monday evening, everyone goes home. Okay, we're not quite sure what that aberration was around kind of system performance. We're gonna just kind of go home, have dinner with their family. Tuesday morning, people come back in. Ooh, all of a sudden, those systems are completely locked up, right? And so Tuesday mid morning, that CEO is also getting an email asking for payment. All right. Hey, we need to go ahead and, kind of, I've stolen your information. I now need you to pay me this amount of ransom, right? This amount of money to get it paid back, to release your data and also release these systems that I've locked up. So as that organization's trying to respond throughout Tuesday, that malware and that attacker is actually adapting to how they're reacting. So it's learning, and they're trying to maintain their persistence there. Sunday, Tuesday afternoon, that organization's like, I don't know what we need to do. I have to just simply go find some help. Now we're in a shutdown situation. So overall, what we see is in a certain very short period of time, traditional attack methods like phishing, like credential theft, stealing usernames and passwords, really also the amount of sensitive data in an organization, that adversary is very quickly able to find out what this is, get a foothold in an organization, and then steal that information first, then lock up those systems. And this is what we see consistently as an attack sequence called double extortion. They're not just about locking up systems. We've all probably heard of ransomware. They're also stealing your data first. So that's why I really highlighted, what is your business worth to you? What do you do? What information do you also have? Because that's where that adversary is looking. And so AI is just increasingly allowing adversaries to make more believable phishing campaigns or social engineering campaigns where they're trying to manipulate human psychology and belief into doing something there. But also the malware that they're developing is actually able to start to evade detection. It's able to hide itself. It's able to adapt on the fly. And so really this is the new normal that we as defenders and organizations simply need to be able to battle against. And so, kind of looking a little bit more broadly away from just one company into, larger systemic trends, 82% of phishing emails are now AI generated. They're getting better and better. It's not just the, typos and broken grammar anymore, where it's pretty clear that that's not the it's a fake email. These ideas of deep fakes, right? Where it's a believable voice, a video, a text. This is making that identity fraud scalable. You can pick up the phone, it's someone asking you to make a payment or to change things, or a video perhaps you're seeing, or kind of a recording there. This is really where also attackers are shifting to. It's not me, it's you. It's everyone you're also doing business with. So that idea of a supply chain, right? We all as organizations do business with many others, and we depend on so that partner or customer or supply chain ecosystem to be able to help our businesses thrive, but also, right, partner with theirs. And so there is that nature of a two-way street, that you might not necessarily be the exact target. You're an avenue into someone else that you depend on to do business with. So what is that business relationship really of value to you? So, a disruption at a local manufacturer might seem like an isolated incident, but when we look at, okay, the broader ecosystem, that manufacturer needs to ship products to someone else who now doesn't have that, product to move. That logistics company can't move a product because maybe that, they're held up because they can't, ship those materials there. Maybe there's contracts defining that we need to have certain product or timing of shipping materials within a certain amount of time, or receiving those items within a certain amount of time. Maybe it's a small widget that's part of a bigger product that you produce. Now that supply chain is hit. So really what I'm getting at is the nature of just supply chain and how businesses fall in with all of that. right? You all, especially in your region, are part of a very strong economy, right? And very interconnected. But that also presents a lot of risk to each other, not just to yourself, but to each other. And so really, evaluating what would a cyber attack mean, not just for my organization, but to those I do business with, which whom I depend on to continue our business and our reputation and our presence in whatever market you may be. So, all it takes is sort of one event, we often like to say, but, the impact is not just on that business, right? It's also about information you may be holding of others or what you're serving with. So, shifting gears a little bit, you know, we look at AI adoption. I think, folks here on the line, I mean, totals, we're embracing AI pretty heavily. Next to mention, I'm sure you guys are too. Organizations as a whole, right, are seeing the opportunity, right? 78% of organizations are using AI, up from 55% last year, right? So it is increasingly very rapid. This is also presents, 66% of people are using it regularly. I use it on a daily basis, right? And 40% of jobs are in some way exposed to AI's impact, right? So really what that means is the areas of, opportunities of efficiency, better clarity, automation, all of those components, really about the security impact, right? We see, look at that, blessing and a curse, that opportunity and risk, 56% increase in harmful AI incidents. And so what we mean by that is, whether it's, social engineering or kind of our deepfake images or things like that, but, also 82%, as I said, of phishing emails, you see a trend here, right? It's just the tried and true basics of attacks that are now embracing AI. They're using AI now too, right, to make it more believable. But I think also for AI use for organizations, it's really important to be aware of, do you even know how your employees are using AI? Do you have that visibility? Do you know what data is going where? Do you even know what data you have that is of critical nature to your organization? Where does it live? Is it being fed into other models? Is someone releasing contracts or other sensitive information into just Copilot? How do we know that? Right? So, the AI adoption is both, right, the opportunity we're seeing, but also not just the security impact of, targeting of organizations from bad actors, but also the insider risk, let's say, of users just simply trying to be more effective at their jobs, but without the guardrails on smart or proper use of AI. And so what does that mean? And how do you, get a better perspective of what your employees are doing? So, if we look a little bit at, AI used by threat actors, I've already referenced some stuff, especially on, phishing. Again, deep fakes, voice cloning, these are definitely there. And I'm not going to say that, the idea of, voice cloning deepfakes is not important, but I really think not getting distracted by the shiny new object of deepfakes and really focusing on the IT and security fundamentals like password hygiene, phishing, don't click that link, like all those fundamentals that, you don't want to skip. These are also being targeted by threat actors to use AI to manipulate even better. So for instance, we saw recently, right, there was some of that reporting by Anthropic, who makes Claude, and we've seen a couple instances of Claude code, obviously that blessing and a curse, that power of AI being used for automated reconnaissance. So meaning really being able to rapidly scan and, monitoring entire organization or organizations at once, and seeing all where the, kind of open doors and holes and misconfigurations may be, to harvest those credentials, to steal all that and penetrate networks. Claude Code effectively was used to automate an attack against 30 organizations at once, kind of with just sort of, snippets of an end user having then certain decision points. But really AI is automating this at scale. There's also that concept many folks have heard about, possibly, of vibe hacking. So this is manipulating, every AI, our large language model like, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, etc., has some guardrails built in, right? We don't want it used for malicious purposes, but there is a way of being able to actually manipulate the way that you're coding, right? Or using that tool to sort of work around those guardrails. So this is that concept of how they're not just being, we're sort of finding the workarounds around the guardrails. We may have a wall in front of us, but if it's not a full wall and there's a door on the side, I'm just going to go through that door, let's say, as an example. Leveraging AI through the kill chain. This is where I really want everyone to sort of evaluate your own security posture as I work through this, because what we're seeing is just a rapid increase in both the scale, meaning, kind of instead of attacking one or two organizations, I'm going to be able to attack hundreds because AI is doing that work for me, but also the speed, right? It's making what humans would have to do in terms of hours or days, it's making it happen in seconds or minutes. So with AI really being used to the kill chain, it's researching organizations, like I said, finding all those misconfigurations, the exposed services, the kind of security holes that may exist, um, and finding where it's going to penetrate first. It's also going to generate those phishing emails, that content, finding out where they're able to increase that reach, right, or the speed at which they're going to be able to get through, and it's actually able to adapt on the fly, like debugging for character and coding issues, right? Signing, research. What we mean by this is really being able to adapt to detections, to security teams, to, or security tools, let's say, like in, antivirus or whatever, really being able to escape a detection there. So what holes exist in your security posture related to monitoring, patching, hardening, credential access? AI is making this much easier for organization or for attackers, excuse me, to exploit organizations at scale. Okay. And so I'd really, again, I'm getting at the fundamentals. That's where I want everyone to really, kind of make sure you've got that, focused and locked in. Doesn't mean to ignore the deep fakes and voice cloning, but the speed and scale at which attacks are happening now when embraced with AI by attackers is definitely driving an increase in compromise. And so we want to make sure that we're handling and aware of where our gaps are there. So with that in mind, security is holistic, right? It's not just IT's problem. It's really about organizations these days are using, technology in many ways, right? It's not just the IT team who's managing, or trying to oversee the, patching or setup of your, smart boards in your meeting rooms, or maybe, your desktop there. It's about revenue operations and using the cloud or various different automation functions to make billing and invoicing and, revenue recognition faster. It's about how sales teams are using customer relationship management software or Slack or Teams or, email, of course, right, to be able to conduct business. Manufacturing using operational technology and other, automation and robotics functions to be able to move faster. Just a couple of examples, but every organization is touching technology or the cloud or automation in some way now. And so we really need to understand what the use of an organization, how an organization is using technology and all that exists there. And so, additionally with AI as well, right, a well-meaning employee can use AI, but, may be, funneling sensitive information up, right? Or it's, kind of fed into other tools, right? That's going to kind of, make those changes and modifications. So, we see also that according to McKinsey, 88% of organizations are using AI in at least one business unit, up from about 78% last year. So, also meaningful increase. But what I ultimately really want to, highlight is the dependency between these business units too. How does your sales and marketing team rely on revenue operations? How does your transportation and kind of logistics and shipping, team, let's say, work with how to move or coordinate movement of the widgets you're building by the, production line teams and so forth, right? Or your employees, how are they using, email, different databases, different platforms, and what information sits in there that could be, right, pose a risk to your organization, losing the competitive advantage. All these are areas really organizations need to think about. And so, there's a certain segment of the market here, really, many of you here on the phone, where that mid-market. So really what we mean by that is about, 100 employees, let's say up to about 2,000. That could be a very wide range, but it's really that next level up, let's say, from small and medium-sized business. And I'm just using some, kind of general guidelines and metrics from, Gartner, where they're defining that segment. But mid-market firms really, unfortunately, carry outsized risk. Sort of the perfect intersection of value and vulnerability, where you've got really high value data. You play key supply chain roles, right? And again, that can be every different vertical. It's just who we do business with. But often, it's really lean teams without those enterprise level defense resources. Maybe the staffing, you've only got a couple folks maybe on staff, and you're trying to manage multiple tools, also keeping the lights on, handling various things. So some may have a security posture. We talk with them a lot, right? Both, organizations together of, I've got maybe a firewall, maybe I've got an EDR, maybe I've got some patching, but, we're struggling. We're having a hard time keeping up. And so those lean teams are relying on AI, right, and other components, where maybe that's not as vetted as it should be, or there's not as much controls, right? You have to keep that business moving forward. You can't necessarily slow it down. So for better, for worse, threat actors understand this, right? And so they are a bigger reward than SMB in terms of, if I'm going to compromise an organization, I'm going to be able to actually extort you for more money because of the nature of what you do, the dependency you have in your supply chain, your ecosystem, but also you're going to feel that pain more. Maybe you have a board, right, or investors, right, not just a kind of a local business. And that's absolutely not to say that we are, dismissing SMB. Absolutely. Small and medium-sized businesses also face serious targeting because, unfortunately, security postures and security investment are often a little lower. Those are hard decisions to make. So really, that's why I mentioned really evaluating what the impact of a breach or an attack or downtime in your organization could be, and sort of what your security posture capabilities or goals are next year as a business. What would hinder that? Really, we start to see that cybersecurity investment can actually move that business forward to prevent it from also going backwards. And that is really driving a lot of mid-market organizations and SMB organizations to really want to work with a partner, right? Whether that be a managed security service provider. I just need, I got some IT stuff. I need just to outsource security, or maybe I need more holistic support. Maybe that's, kind of really looking to, we want to refocus our staff on strategic initiatives and have a managed service provider handle the other components. But increasingly, we see this balance of mid-market organizations just starting to outsource those components, especially security. So, evaluating what your current posture is, where your gaps may be, but also where those opportunities are for maybe refocusing efforts, really evaluating, kind of where do we want to focus in 2026 and beyond, and how can we utilize the broader ecosystem there? That's something we see a lot of organizations just choosing to do. So, in terms of the business impact, the downtime, that's why, I was mentioning the valuation, we see anywhere from $9,000 to $14,000 per minute of average downtime costs. Now that's depending on different verticals, right? From manufacturing, logistics, shipping, things like that. This could be a real number. Being unable to produce products can inhibit, right, the ability to, generate revenue or fines or other potential, kind of, impacts there. So really evaluating what would the cost of downtime simply be. Also 4.88 million is the average total cost of breach. We get that from, kind of IBM's annual cost of a data breach report. Now, that is obviously in the average, but also, right, consider not just the actual cost of a breach there, of whether that be, the extortion, the, remediation components and so forth, but also think about prolonged downtime, lost contracts, eroded trust with suppliers, partners, customers. I mentioned the speed and scale, but also, right, 47% global increase in cyber attacks backed by AI. Can we match the speed of the attack landscape right now, or where do we need to start buttoning up those holes, or closing up some of those gaps that we're seeing? 205 days, and apologies for the quick typo there, right? But that's really the average that we see of, a company may be operational a few days after the attack, but full recovery time for mid-market companies is 205 days. So this can really linger in terms of systems, processes, production, what have you, really being impacted in a longer term than, well, I've suddenly, released my systems, from ransomware after, let's say, a week or two, this, does linger. And it's not just the technology or process, it's also the impact on people. There's been some research that's come out of this lately, but cyber attacks have a serious implication on staff mental health, kind of stress, also just general morale, right? And so, we see kind of that people component and an implication there on what an attack does to organizations go through this. And really that human cost of people don't perform at their best just because stress levels are heightened and there's a lot more pressure and broken processes. So, ultimately think about that people, process, and technology as part of all of this. But with that, right, I mentioned people, boards are increasingly demanding, they're recognizing the financial risk that goes along with a cyber attack. And so boards are increasingly taking a huge interest in implementing stronger cyber controls, with 91% really trying to pursue something, at a higher level. And this is obviously being driven in part by the cyber insurance industry. So as more and more organizations are really seeking to get, better cyber insurance coverage or just coverage in general, insurers are also requiring that those security capabilities or postures are higher. They're not going to take on more risk than they need to. And so the controls are, increasing controls by boards being demanded is also sort of correlated with the insurance industry also requiring increased levels of capability to be also minimize their downside risk as well. Okay. So, taking a look at a couple examples. Sorry, I'm not sure why that was there. So, a case study in business loss. We probably all heard about it. The Jaguar Land Rover, attack was notable, right? Now, this is a very large global automotive, manufacturing, company. But it's a great case study in what an attack does, how it happened, and then why it matters. So in August, Jaguar Land Rover got hit by a group called Scattered Spider. This is a group that really focuses and specializes in advanced social engineering. And so this attack crippled all production lines. They could not make cars, but that rolled downstream into they could not sell any vehicles because systems were unavailable to be able to identify inventory. Also, suppliers that they had to make parts or others. Suddenly, if everything was down, those companies that serve sort of just-in-time delivery, they're making just enough product to meet the current requirements, not necessarily hold on to that. They had to start laying off staff too. So there is a huge financial implication of the Jaguar Land Rover cyber attack, not just on Jaguar, but its larger supply chain of, let's say, mid-market and even SMB organizations that depended on it. And the UK, actually, government had to bail out Jaguar Land Rover, I think to the tune of like 2 point some billion, because it was ultimately a GDP issue, not just a certain business. And so the way attack happened, it's what we see being used, the same techniques being used against small, medium-sized business and mid-market. They exploited valid credentials, kind of scammed their way in, used legitimate usernames and passwords, were compromised, public-facing vulnerabilities in systems. They found the sensitive data and they stole that, and then they deployed custom malware to be able to lock up those systems, and then shutting down and extorting those manufacturing plants. The same attack chain here that we see against Jaguar is what is commonly used against SMB. So if we look at then why this matters, they lost about 6.7 million per day in losses. This was significant. Between July 1st and the 30th, the company reported about 220 million US dollars in losses based upon their recent financial reporting. And then the losses before tax, basically they lost almost everything, right? They were negative 485 million pounds in Q2 versus 398 million in profit the year prior. And so ultimately, this is just a prime example of a business resilience crisis. The implications of an attack, the lack of processes, the lack of security capabilities, rapid response, that governance overseeing everything was unfortunately missing, including they didn't have cyber insurance. They were still trying to negotiate and figure out quite the level they needed. And so when this attack happened, they didn't have any coverage or fallback there. So when we look at an example like this, really, especially the why it matters, what would the financial implications of downtime, cost of revenue, cost of company performance, et cetera, be for you all? That's what I want folks to be thinking about here. Another one, right? And again, ironically, this is the same group that targeted, Jaguar Land Rover was Marks and Spencer. Okay, so this is equivalent to, let's say, Target or Walmart here in the United States. There's obviously other, kind of big retail chains and so forth there in Canada. They faced a similar situation. Same attack, sequence happened. Attackers exploited valid creds. Ransomware was deployed, and they stole that information and then basically stopped all operations. The attack wiped approximately 750 million pounds off of the company's market value almost immediately. This was crazy. 300 million British pounds were lost in operating profit for the fiscal year, right? They basically said we've lost 99% of our reported profits in the first half. So the impact of a cyber incident, right? And I apologize for the typos, folks. I don't know why this is there. It's got direct implications on company revenues, share prices, and profitability. Okay, so what does the business mean to you, and what is that requirement there, right? How much cyber risk and financial risk can you withstand, or are you willing to take? Would a similar situation where systems and sales were offline for a couple months in this case, would that be too much? What would the implications be? And that's why I was mentioning really that perfect intersection of value versus risk, where a mid-market SMB, right, there aren't those deep pockets to store that revenue to withstand this breach, right? An attack like this could mean closing a branch, letting people go, losing contracts because you can't fulfill it. So ultimately, what we see really is, a lot of mid-market, right, as I mentioned, or SMB is, don't go it alone. But we see that alert fatigue. So for example, many mid-market orgs, like I mentioned, maybe you have a firewall, maybe you got an endpoint detection response solution. You're trying to also keep the lights on. Multiple different tools are leading to that employee burnout, right? Over alerting, false positives, right? It's making it easier for a lot of this new sort of AI-driven enabled attacks to go undetected, or to possibly, there's not enough people to watch all the different alerts or things that may be firing because everyone's facing these attacks. Also, it becomes difficult to be able to keep up with operations, but also integrate all the different sources, right? Of security, technology, networks, the cloud, as organizations are transforming, especially since, we all went home in 2020, right? Because of the pandemic. And so cloud was forced on many organizations, whether they were ready or not. And so this opened up the ecosystem, right? For many of us now that we're now living with this and working on this, it opened up everything to be beyond the traditional perimeter. So how are we integrating all the different sources of not just security, but also technology awareness, understanding what is even out there and how is data moving around? Because at the end of the day, adversaries are following the data. They're not just targeting the systems. And that's where the cloud especially is, kind of extending this. Adversaries really want what makes your organizations tick. And that pressure point of, I can't let this get out because this will be damaging to my business. They understand that. So many teams are really struggling, right, to manage these multiple interfaces and workflows. And then these security gaps, unfortunately, are letting these threats, frankly, slip through. So really what we see is sort of a governance requirement. We need to make sure that we're getting all of our security technologies, what exist or whatever holes we may need to fill, really all speaking together at once, but also really aligning with the business, really meeting what our organizations are requiring and are okay with tolerating from a risk perspective. That may be different for every attendee here, right? Some orgs may be more risk averse, some may be welcome to taking more chances, right? And that's an individual decision you have to make. But overall, it's about the ease of use and kind of the streamlining of security monitoring to align with how organizations are using technology, and what's the fastest and most streamlined way to do that. So a way that we see many organizations going, is really towards sort of a platform approach. How can we ensure that we have all the necessary security capabilities to fit a strategy, not just various tools, capabilities, the strategy aligns with maybe it's cyber insurance requirements or keeping up with PCI regs, or even aligned to frameworks like CIS or the Canadian cyber kind of centers, controls and so forth that they have also recently released. And so that platformization, let's say, of security is a way to really ensure full coverage of preventing things from happening to begin with, keeping up with the pace of the threat landscape, detecting bad things, responding to bad things, and then showing compliance and governance and kind of adherence to, let's say, regulators, to a board, or just as simply saying, look, we're going to follow a standard framework like the CIS controls, and we're going to have a way that we establish that strategy. So there's a lot of acronym soup here on the slide, but really what I'm showing and what we want to stress is, evaluate the different layers that you have across your organization. So like I said, mentioned users, devices, the cloud, networks, different locations. But then how are we having a layered defense? How I am, keeping as many, not just, kind of malware attacks, but preventing my credentials from being, kind of stolen or used against me to begin with. How am I able to continuously monitor that with full observability, or have that, 24/7, 365 monitoring that is really essential now? Attacks don't just happen during business hours when we want them to. Right here in the US, we've got Thanksgiving in 2 days. Right? I myself am about to head out on some PTO. Well, right? Hackers aren't going to wait. You need that monitoring so you can also have peace of mind and be able to also see that business through if there is something. So really, I would be evaluating that, not just the tool set you have, but really how is that aligning with our strategy? And what is the most cost-effective and streamlined way to be able to align our security strategy also with our business? And what compliance and regulatory requirements do we need to meet that our business is dependent on meeting, and how are we achieving that? So really, this is creating sort of a modern foundation for cyber resilience, let's say. This idea of a unified architecture means that we have an easily adoptable layered security approach, right? This means that if there is an attack, an adversary has to constantly be right at every stage. We have, security capabilities that are, if one, let's say, necessarily they get past one, there's another one to make it harder. At the end of the day, an adversary or threat actor is going to go with whoever is the easiest target, the least amount of effort. So the harder you can make it for an adversary, the less likely they are to attack you or to keep trying, right? It's also about, right, getting that single pane of glass, let's say. And I know this is very, can be cliche, but it's really about providing that context and understanding of what is going on in my environment and how is that helping us make decisions we need to as a business in terms of what threats and risks we're facing right now and how we need to be addressing those in the future, right? How are we getting that full view of what our threat and risk posture is to best support our boards, our leadership, et cetera, to make those decisions we need to as a business. That also helps with, hey, do we have compliance gaps? Are we, kind of in violation of various regulatory needs, regulatory requirements? And if so, what would penalties and violations there be? Again, you see me highlighting that conversation about risk, but also where showing compliance can also really help with, accessing new markets. Obviously here in the United States, we've got our, Department of Defense has now started enforcing CMMC 2.0. So this is the security regulations and compliance laws that are governing how defense contractors support overall, kind of the various different military branches and functions that they're looking to private industry support. If you do not meet compliance requirements within CMMC, you will lose those contracts. So we see many organizations now scrambling, like, hey, if I'm not getting this in place, what does that mean for me? But also those that are like, what, this could be a differentiator for us. By meeting CMMC requirements, I can access new lucrative, federal contracts. We see this with SOC 2. SOC 2 is really part of that validation that our organization protects customer data, right? When I say our organization, I'm speaking generally, not just for Total. Total is SOC 2 compliant. But, where we see kind of that stress of securing customer information, organizations are more likely to go with a vendor that is protecting customer data versus not. So we see contracts where SOC 2 is actually a requirement. So that's something you need to be thinking about, right? That business opportunity, not just a cost center. And then really that business continuity. Can you keep operations running while threats are emerging, right, or going on? We are not going to live in a world where there is no threats ever, or we're never going to experience a cyber attack. It will happen. It's a matter of when, not if. So the key question is, if it is a matter of when, how fast can you respond and recover and keep your operations running during one of those? That's the question. Not is there going to be a cyber attack, but how will we keep operations going during that? And how quickly can we recover, keep things online? How do we stem that bleeding? So really what that does is help strengthen those client relationships, right? And protect that reputation. I would argue, yes, we don't want cyber incidents to happen in an organization, but we see some organizations coming out of attacks where they've had one and they manage that business continuity, that recovery, and even that, that PR, right? That press or reputational component. They show to their clients and customers how they're navigating that. They can almost emerge stronger in terms of reputation because everyone knows, we all know an attack will happen. So are they emerging sort of as a leader of how they're keeping operations online versus, ideally having none, but it's going to happen whether we like it or not. And so ultimately it gets at sort of the overarching, aspect of risk of, is the risk that we face and the gaps that we have more severe than what we are willing to spend, right? That kind of basic calculation of risk. So how can we most cost efficiently manage risk and get the necessary security capabilities to keep those lights on, ensuring business continuity and recovery and resiliency? And that's where cutting the tools sprawl and overhead. And that's where we see a lot of organizations, like I said, going towards that. Service providers, whether it's an MSSP, whether it's an MSP, outsourcing, or looking for help from industry to help really align that business with its risk posture and where it needs to go. So overall, what I think we've, kind of really evaluated is, as technology and AI and businesses are evolving, right? How is that introducing more risks or threats or vulnerabilities or gaps to an organization? But how can we use that awareness of that and then really leveraging the different resources we have, whether it's consolidated security tools, excellent managed security service providers like Next Dimension, right? Kind of just better awareness of threat landscape, what's going on, but also what our organization just really values or what moves that needle. How can we shift that lens into, by protecting all of this, we can actually enter new markets. We can withstand it against our competition better. We can improve the way that we are talking with our clients and our customers about, how we're protecting our systems, our data that they're requiring, that they're, counting on us to deliver. So overall, right, I just wanted to paint that picture for everyone. And, I figure we could open it up to Q&A here, Mark. I don't know if we have any questions, but, would love perspectives and thoughts and any questions from our attendees as well of what we explored today and any concerns that they have or questions and so forth.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, very much. Sarah, I think you're looking at the Q&A. Any questions have come up?
I'm not seeing any questions right now.
Okay, we'll give it a few seconds. Andrew, you covered a lot of territory this morning.
We did. Yes, with kind of cyber resilience in an hour. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a topic that's resonating in every one of our conversations with customers, prospects, partners. It's very interesting times. I think from our perspective, Andrew, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know you're trying to get out on PTO and grab your sister at the airport as you start your Thanksgiving weekend. Enjoy the mountains. Andrew's from Denver, just so everyone knows. And I want to really thank Total and yourself for the partnership you have with Next Dimensions as we protect our clients. We have a wonderful relationship with you. From our clients and prospects that are on the phone, I can't again thank you enough for your time. So thank you. I hope it was informative. And I trust you could take one or two nuggets away with you from today's conversation. And if you do, please reach out if you have any questions to myself or our client executives, Nancy, Chris, and Karen are on the call today, anyone at Next Dimension will be more than happy to help you. There will be two things that happen. We have recorded this session and we will send it to you. And we have developed just a quick short survey. And if you could complete that for us, that will really help guide us in future sessions so that we make sure they're of value to you. So we'll give everyone back 15 minutes of their morning. Enjoy your afternoon. Andrew, thank you very much. And we appreciate everyone's attendance today. Enjoy your afternoon, folk. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.